Welcome, everyone, to our fifth R3.0 Bioregional Carrying Capacities session. Today, we're going to talk about the Devon Doughnut together with Isabel Carlisle and Nick Palling from the Devon bioregion. My name is Ralph Thurm. I'm the Managing Director of R3.0, and together with my colleague Bill Bowie, who's our Senior Director, we're facilitating this session as many other sessions. We're very happy to have you here. Just before we start, we'd like to give you a little bit of an overview. We've done a bit of the welcome in the sidebar already, and I have a couple of comments on the engagement guidance, and then we'll move it over to Bill, who will introduce our two speakers, Isabel and Nick, and lead us into the session. And after their presentations, we're going to go into a facilitated open dialogue before Bill has some closing notes, and we'll make you aware of the next dialogues that we're planning. So just a couple of guidance here for those who are new. Those who have been to those dialogues know some of this already. While we're presenting, it would be great if you can stay on mute. We also welcome if you have your cameras on, and understand if you can't. But it's always good to talk to faces than into just names on a black screen. If you have questions, please pose those in the chat sidebar right as they occur, so that you don't forget them. We'll curate those questions and cover that in the facilitated dialogue segment after the presentations of our speakers. It might be that we summarize some of those questions or cluster them just for efficiency reasons, but sometimes we may also ask you to voice them yourselves if you're okay with that. Please keep your questions in any way succinct, on topic, and be respectful to all other participants. We also have a resource document. You have the link here, so you can just click on that. That really helps us to prevent distractions in the sidebar during the sessions when people put in all sorts of different sorts of comments and extra resources and stuff like that. So we have that document, which is a living document and will continue to be a living document also after the session. So you can input, things there if you want. It's an accessible document during the event and after the event as a living resource. If you add something to that document, it would be great if you would just add your name before your contribution, so that we can identify from who it was. That's no absolute must, but if you want to be identified, then please put your name in front of the comments that or the resources that you are putting in there. As you know, we are recording this session because we're also publicly posting these sessions on our Bioregional Carrying Capacities landing page on the R3.0 website. We have created a new space for all of our bioregional work, and you would find the recordings, and you would find the slide deck, and you would find the living resource document link in the respective part of the website where we are posting the recording or everything around this session. So that's all for an intro, some of the engagement guidance. Bill, I'll hand it over to you to go into the agenda and get us into the session.
Great, thank you, Ralph. And I'm just throwing that resources link into the sidebar. We're really pleased to have Isabel Carlisle and Nick Palling from the Bioregional Learning Center in the UK with us for this, our fifth session. I've worked closely with Isabel in the past. We both participated in the Regenerative Communities Network for a number of years, which was really one of the early bioregional networks globally. This is a session that we've actually, or a topic that we've co-presented on in the past in the Global Summit of bioregions that happened in 2022 that Isabel helped to organize. We had a session that we looked at the Devon Doughnut, along with the UN work that we at R3.0 have done, and the municipal work that Randy Saad had done. So there's a history here of relationship. Also, for those of you who are joining new, I'll give a brief history of this series. This series on bioregional carrying capacities started at the end of last year, and it started in the design school for Regenerating Earth. And so the first two sessions in late last year and early this year were just for members of the design school. And Joe and Penny from the design school talked with us. We proposed the idea of making these public, and Joe and Penny embraced that. So these are now publicly available, both the sessions themselves and the recordings for anybody who wants to tune in. After my sort of introductory session, we had a session with Randy Saad on municipal carrying capacities, and then we had a session on sweet spots, hearing from Avit Bhowmick on his Powers of 10 report that identified the 10,000 communities of 10,000 up to about 100,000 as a sweet spot, if you will. So this is sort of right in the bioregional zone, and Anders Bjorn presenting on absolute sustainability assessment, which is an assessment methodology that takes carrying capacity thresholds into account. Last session was with Mark McElroy. So he presented on a context-based approach to bioregional carrying capacity. And so now that brings us to this fifth session. So that's just a little bit of background. You can find those recordings on our landing page for this series, which we'll share later in this session. That brings us to this session, which is focused on a bioregional implementation of the donut. And I'm assuming that most people on this call know what the donut is, but just very briefly, it does align with the idea of carrying capacity thresholds in ecological and social systems. It's called the ecological ceilings and social foundations, based on the work of Kate Rayworth. But Isabel may be giving us some additional background on that. And so what we find, I'll just say very briefly, what I have found most interesting about the Devon Doughnut is the twinning thresholds. So the idea that of applying this to multiple different constituencies. But I'm not going to say more than that because I don't want to steal thunder from Isabel. I'll just say that was of the many aspects about the Devon Doughnut that I found particularly interesting. That was tops for me. And so Isabel will largely give sort of like a background of what's happened, and then Nick will fill us more in on where things are heading in the future. So I think that gives a pretty good background of what you'll be hearing from Isabel and Nick. And so without further ado, I'll hand it on over to you, Isabel.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to get my screen sharing going. Okay, so hopefully that's all clear and you can see that.
We can, yes, looking great.
Okay, grand. So I'm going to start by giving you an idea of what is the Bioregional Learning Center, who are we, where did we come from? I'm really going to take you on a journey, like how did we get to make the Devon Doughnut in the first place? Where did it lead to after that? And how are we kind of bringing it now back into our work? So we've been going for 8 years. Nick and Jane Brady, who's not on this call, and myself met at Dartington, which is near Totnes in South Devon, because I organized something called a food charrette, food systems charrette, as part of a course that I and Pamela Mang and Joel Glansberg and John Thackera taught way back in spring of 2016. And at that design charrette, We presented on bioregions and on South Devon and on what this work could be and on regenerative design. And at the end of that, Jane and Nick came up to me and said, we've just got to make this happen. And we've been making it happen ever since, which has been a very exciting journey of not always knowing where we were going, but kind of, finding our way forwards. So we work with whole landscapes and whole systems. Of course, you can talk about bioregions and what is bioregioning in so many different ways, because it's encompassing everything, really. It's encompassing our ecosystems and our human systems. And more, we talk about where our ecosystems and human systems collide with Earth systems on the move or colliding with Gaia. So in a period of climatic destabilization, we're seeing real impact on our ecosystems and on our human systems in terms of flooding and drought and food insecurity and things like that. So what we're doing at the moment, which I will come to, is really addressing climate adaptation. So we've always seen a role for ourselves as holding the space in what we call the muddy middle between civil society and policymakers, or between artists and ecologists, as we recently did in a very enjoyable program that's now got to the end of its third year to restore the salt marshes on our local river, the River Dart. But all the time we're thinking about how do we shape resilient futures. This is our definition of bioregions and bioregioning. I'll just let you read that. So where are we? So we are, you can see on the right-hand map, you've got Devon, and there's a place called Plymouth marked on that. So we are just to the right of Plymouth. We're the bulge that sticks out into the sea that's next to Cornwall. And we are defined by water. So we are defined by our rivers. We've got the River Tamar to the west of us, which has been the boundary between Devon and Cornwall since 966 AD. We've got the River Tean to the east of us, and we've got where all our rivers rise on Dartmoor in the north and the sea in the south. Of course, bioregions are not political boundaries, but the Tamar is a pretty hefty dividing line. So we respect what King Alfred of Wessex laid down in 966. So we're also, you could say, part of the Channel bioregion. So you'll see how South Devon sticks out into the English Channel, and we probably have more in common with parts of France across the Channel than we do certainly with other parts of England. So the Devon Doughnut process came into being because we had been wrestling ever since we started up in 2017 in what we thought we needed, which was a baseline for our bioregion. We kept on saying, well, how do we know how our bioregion's doing? Surely we ought to be able to assess it. So we looked at different ways of assessing. We looked at the SDG goals. We looked at the Happy Cities Index. We looked at various other things, and we looked at the donut. So what happened was that in the summer of 2020, we were all in a state of shock, having been locked down since March. There was an event that was put on in Devon online called Regenerate Devon. And Kate Rayworth, who was the originator of Doughnut Economics, sent a video to that gathering that was screened at the gathering. And she was really encouraging people in Devon to make this economic, ecological portrait or assessment of how Devon was doing. So this was the whole of Devon, which is a very big county, not just South Devon. And there was a huge enthusiasm in the chat next to the Zoom screen saying, we've just got to do this. How do we do this? Let's make it happen. And Jane and I looked at each other and thought, well, we'd never intended to explore a baseline of sorts for the whole county, but why not? Let's just do it, because there's energy there and there are people who want to do it. So the following October, we put out a call to people to join an interactive online process that we called Coffee and Donuts, that met every fortnight online for a year to create the Devon Doughnut. And it grew from 7 people to about 170 people over the course of that year. So this is Kate Rayworth, and you'll see behind her is the very powerful donut graphic. I think if graphics can change the world, this is probably one of the graphics that is changing the world. And as was explained earlier, on the outside ring, you've got the ecological ceiling, which relates to the Stockholm Resilience Centre's analysis as to kind of the limits that we're hitting at the moment. And if we go beyond these limits, what will happen? And then you've got the social foundation, the limit below which we do not want to fall, which is much more about humans and human systems. And that really relates to the Sustainable Development Goals. So you could say that the donut is a selfie. I think I would agree with that. I think one of the downsides of the donut is that it doesn't necessarily tell you what to do once you've got it. But I'm not going to say much more about that because I think Nick is going to pick up that story. So our ambition was to create an interactive donut on the Devon Doughnut website. So if any of you are interested and want to learn more, there is a website called devondoughnut.org. That can go in your resources page as well. And in there, you will find not just an interactive donut into which you can drill down, and you can hover over waste, for instance, on the outer ring, and it will take you down into what I'm about to talk about, which is the twin track pathways for citizens and policymakers, both in terms of indicators, metrics, and pathways to action. So you can really explore what we did, but also in that website is a lot of slides because we recorded exactly what we did. So we kind of have charted the whole process from beginning to end. So you can follow the process and you can look at the little video we made and so on. So everything is explained. All the work that we do and have ever done has always been shared publicly so that everybody can see what we did. And if they want to replicate that, they're very welcome to. So one of the things we realized straight off is that we needed to contextualize our indicators. So what did that mean? So we recognized that ocean acidification was not going to make an awful lot of sense to people in South Devon walking down to the beach and staring at the sea. How would they know if the ocean was becoming more acid? So we renamed it. We renamed it the number of fishing vessels out of Devon's harbours bottom trawling days per year. And that was a trial. We were trying out, does that make sense? Not sure. And just to drill down more into coastal marine health, the sessions that we held online, the coffee and donut sessions, the way we organized them was that we went domain by domain. And I think I'm right in saying there are 22 domains in the donut. And we called together a panel of 4 or 5 people who were working in that domain, who had specialist knowledge in South Devon of that domain. And we primed them ahead of time. And we said to them, we would like you to tell us what you think is the key scenario in your domain, coastal marine health, that if we could move the needle on that scenario would actually move the whole domain towards greater health. And for instance, in coastal marine health, we had the harbour master from Brixham Harbour join us. Brixham is the biggest fishing port in the whole of England. So a lot of fishing vessels go in and out. And we said to him, do you think the number of fishing vessels out of Devon's harbours bottom trawling days per year is going to be the right kind of indicator? And we had got that because we had read a very interesting scientific paper saying that bottom trawling releases as much carbon as aviation globally per annum. And we thought, well, surely we can do something about that. And he said, no, you couldn't really go down that route without really upsetting a lot of trawler owners and fishermen. It's much more intelligent to think of highly protected marine areas. So we shifted how we talked about that, what the domain was and what we called it and so on, according to that advice. And you'll see we've got 3 examples here. Health and well-being and education both made it onto the final cut. But again, they went through this whole process of being interrogated, the expert panel presenting, and then in the coffee and donut session, where there was always about, I don't know, 30 to 40 people who came along. Then those scenarios would be interrogated, and at the end of the session, we would end up with the preferred scenario, which would go into the final interactive donut. So we realized quite early on that if anything was going to change, we needed to bring citizens and policymakers, stroke decision makers on board. So we needed to engage people who lived here, people who worked here, citizens wearing a citizen hat, i.e. they're people who are fully engaged in thinking about their communities, or at least they were when they were wearing the hat. And then we were also kind of going to engage policymakers as well. And we recognized that there was an important role for the Bioregional Learning Centre in holding this middle space and enabling these two strands of action to communicate. So then, having decided that, we then wanted to kind of drill down into what that could look like. So here we have an example of the education domain, of how we created paths for citizens and policymakers. So having got the indicator that we thought was important, so we've got percentage of pupils and parents who advocate for more guided interaction in nature in order to improve student mental health on the left, citizens, policymakers, related indicator, percentage of young people of school age prescribed by the NHS, the National Health Service, with time in nature at low or no cost. So we were thinking all the time, what would make the greatest impact here? And how could these two entities, these kind of two strands of kind of people energy, take action? And we were testing out in the coffee and donut sessions whether this made sense. I'm not sure we entirely stuck with what is on the slide in the final cut, but that just shows the way that we were thinking. So we wanted to be able to measure that. So of course, for every indicator, we had to create a metric, which is where you've got the boundaries, and we wanted to look at what was happening at the moment as well. So we had something to compare it to. And we weren't at all inhibited by knowing that there was actually no data available for that particular indicator. Some donuts are really focused on saying, we're only going to make a donut with the data that we know we have access to, that we can lay our hands on, but we didn't want to be constrained by that. So these were the steps in our process. As you can see on the left, we called it the space for revitalization, which really were the coffee and donut sessions. So we ran those sessions as a public inquiry in many ways, as action learning. So we discussed everything in the open. If we got stuck, we surfaced it. We got everyone thinking together. How do we unstick ourselves? What do we want to do next? And bringing in the experts was absolutely a game changer for us, because it gave us a real solidity and a grounding in that place, with real life examples as to what was going on and what we would need to do in order to shift that needle towards greater health. So we made an indicator matrix for 22 domains. I've just given you an example there. That's just 2 of them. If anyone's interested, we can share the indicator matrix as a PDF. But as you'll see, we haven't got the headings there, I can see, but on the left-hand side, you have got the overall indicator, and then you've got it broken down into citizens and policymakers. And then moving further along to the right, you've got what first citizens and then policymakers could do in terms of a pathway to action. So all the time we were thinking about what do we want to see happen as a result of this? So I hope it's clear enough that you can see it. And as I say, we can share. And also this is what you get when you hover over the interactive donut on the Devon Doughnut website and you go deeper down into it. So at the end of the process, we held a poll online. We thought that people would really want to know more, that they would want more data and so on. What was really interesting is that is not what came to the top. People wanted more narratives and storytelling. which is kind of real lived experience and stories that they could tell to other people as examples as what could be done, but also what needed to be done. And then lighting fires all over Devon, just kind of really getting the energy up and getting the enthusiasm there for people wanting to make change happen. No one voted for data comparison or a targeting tool, but we're hoping they're going to change their minds on that at some point. So I wanted to just kind of, the second half of my presentation is really talking about what we're doing now, because, well, what we have been doing over the past year, because you'll see as I get towards the end that the Doughnut process and climate adaptation are beginning to kind of flow together. So this is the definition of climate change mitigation and climate change adaptation from the Worldwide Fund for Nature. Climate change adaptation means altering our behavior systems and in some cases ways of life to protect our families, our economies, and the environment in which we live from the impacts of climate change. And we've taken that as our way of explaining to other people what climate adaptation is. So why are we doing this? I mean, it's kind of obvious, I'm sure, to all of you that we have these tipping points. So at the beginning of my talk, I was talking about where systems collide. So these are the Earth systems that are becoming increasingly destabilized, that are colliding in unexpected and multiple ways with our human systems and ecosystems. And there's a lot of research being done on this at Exeter University, which is just down the road from us. In Devon, we're very fortunate because our county council, Devon County Council, got together with Cornwall County Council and the Isles of Scilly, which are off to the west of Cornwall in the Atlantic. And they created a very useful report on climate adaptation. And they collected up all sorts of data, and they, in particular, analyzed risk. And so these are the chief recommendations that were made not necessarily by them, but by the IPCC Special Report on Extreme Events. So we, in a minute, I'll get onto the Devon, Cornwall, Isles of Scilly adaptation strategy. But you can see in this report, which is low regret measures, these are things that we could do. And these are things that we've really taken on board in our bioregion when thinking about what we want to do in terms of climate adaptation, what can be done that isn't necessarily to do with infrastructure. We obviously have not enough funding to change the infrastructure here, but we can work into the actions which are about behavior change. Okay, so here is the climate adaptation strategy that I was talking about, and these are the chief themes that emerge. These are the risks that we're facing. In last June, we had gotten funding from our district council, which covers half of our bioregion, to run a climate adaptation learning journey physically around South Devon. We hired a bus, and in that bus we had local councillors, we had people from climate action groups in the local community, and other people as well. And we literally for a week drove around and we visited farms, we visited community health centres, we visited parish councils and town councils. We went up to Dartmoor, which is where our headwaters are, and looked at leaky dams and how they were slowing the flow of water rushing off the moor when we had high rainfall. We went down to Dartmouth, which is on the coast, and we talked to the harbour master about a very near flooding event that had happened that previous winter, when the whole town came within about a foot of being flooded because an extremely low pressure system had come over at high tide and at springs tide as well, so kind of amplified high tide. We created a discussion paper, and what this learning journey did for us is it kind of really identified on the ground what people are experiencing and what the need is. So we were looking for answers to questions. What we were doing in the past year is thinking not so much about carrying capacities of the land, but the capacities of people to step up to the challenges of climate adaptation. So how do we learn faster than the pace of climate change? Obviously, we need data about carrying capacities and about how the land is responding to Earth systems on the move and the impacts on communities in order to make that happen. But we're also putting equal weight onto growing our capacities as citizens, as policymakers, as people who simply live in this place to be able to respond. And we talk a lot about communities being first responders to the long emergency. And again, from the Devon Doughnut, we're bringing in the idea that policymakers and citizens are working side by side and hand in hand. And on the right, you're seeing one of the farms we visited. The farmer is holding up a kind of graphic that's showing the kind of herbs that if you plant them in the soil will put down really deep roots and stabilize the soil. So carrying capacities and community capacities. We want to grow the competencies of citizens and policymakers to work together and take action. And this is how we defined the kind of action that policymakers could take and what citizens could take as well. So we think being able to collect and interrogate data and share data is really important. So we would like to set up some kind of citizen knowledge network in the next phase of our work, and possibly something called a landscape observatory, which I don't know if you talk about that in North America, but certainly in Europe, that's becoming more of a thing. That it's a center very much in the way that Donella Meadows talked about a center for a bioregion, a kind of bioregional learning center that was holding data and maps and models and was able to talk to all these different constituencies in the society of the bioregion that you were operating, and was able to kind of harness the collective will and the energies and know-how of people in the bioregion to be able to solve the problems that were being faced. And here in the picture, you're seeing the town clerk at Kingsbridge town, which is on an estuary, which is more regularly getting flooded from the sea. And he's showing us the garage where they store the sandbags and the list of actions that's pinned to the door as to how citizens come to the garage, open the door, take out the sandbags, and in concert kind of make sure that the town isn't going to get flooded because they get the sandbags out and they put it in the correct place. So this was our top recommendation, a joined up local adaptation strategy. And that's what we're working on at the moment. We've made real progress. We had a meeting last week at which our local district council, which as I said, only covers half of our bioregion, agrees that we need to work at bioregional scale. So now we're going to bring in some of the surrounding district councils to really kind of ram home the message that we need to work at the scale of whole rivers and whole landscapes. So this is also how we describe climate resilience. So all the work that we've done from the very beginning, including the Devon Doughnut, was about building climate resilience. And of course, knowing what the situation is and knowing what you can do about it is a very important part of climate resilience. So kind of knowing why we are doing the work and what the vision is always very important, because it gives you a North Star with which you can navigate your way. So this is my last slide. This is explaining how we're bringing the Devon Doughnut experience together with this absolute imperative for climate adaptation. So I have been trained in regenerative design. I started my training in 2013, and I still find it incredibly useful to think in the terms of regenerative design. So one of the frameworks of regenerative design, as taught by Regenesis, is vitality, viability, and evolutionary capacities. And the flows, connections, networks part is something that Fritjof Capra talks about a lot when he's talking about systems. So all systems are made up of flows, connections, and networks. So we're getting excited about the prospect of bringing the regenerative framework of growing the capacities for vitality, viability, and evolution together with flows, connections, and networks. We kind of started thinking about it through the salt marsh work, and we're going to really dive into this in the coming year. And we're going to create indicators that are life sourced. What does that mean? So that means that's really kind of aligned with how life itself works. A lot of regenerative thinking and acting is understanding how to work with the grain of how life operates in your bioregion. So asking, who is your bioregion? How does your bioregion process situations and people and ecosystems and so on? And how do you work with that rather than kind of coming up with a great idea which actually cuts right across that? And we want to create an indicator matrix for bioregional health. And we're going to use that then for setting up our bioregional financing facility, the community knowledge network, and bioregion-wide decision-making and governance. And all the time, we're just growing our capacities as a bioregion to adapt to climate change. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to hand over to Nick, who's going to really take the story on from where I've left off.
Thank you so much, Isabel. And we'll pause for a moment there and let people take that in. As we transition over to Nick, I just want to say very briefly appreciation for your presentation. And at a certain point, when you were talking about in addition to carrying capacities, for example, of the land, talking about the capacity of people to respond to these earth systems on the move, it reminded me, so we at R3.0 have been using the terms carrying capacity and caring capacity, or the capacity to care. And we've been attributing that to Daniel Christian Wahl because we remember in a session him speaking that. But I've had the sense that actually we heard that first from you in our work on the Global Thresholds and Allocations Network. Now, I can't remember, I don't have it documented, but I think that term carrying capacities actually went further back than our interactions with Daniel. Back to you, Isabel. Do you remember that uttering that term?
Yes, I think I do, but I'm recognizing more and more that ideas come from all quarters simultaneously. So I'm not claiming any real responsibility for that.
Great. Well, we may, going forward, you may see yourself co-attributed in that. So thank you so much for that session. Nick, over to you, please.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Isabel. So I'll share my slides, but just to preface what I'm going to say. So Isabel in Bioregional Learning Centre is the visionary. Isabel is the person who has a big vision for how we might do this. I'm more of the data guy. So when Isabel showed a poll where no one wanted to do metrics and measuring and data, there was probably one vote on there, because that would have been me, because I am very keen on actually measuring some of these metrics. So let me share my slides. Okay, hopefully you can see my slides. Thumbs up, excellent.
Yep.
I had a few options of what I might call this mini presentation. But really, and thinking about what my role in the process is now going forward. It's quite hard to follow Isabel when she sets out her vision for how this might work. But I think to some degree, the Devon Doughnut has already served its purpose in the sense of engaging with people, capturing people's imagination. The fact that one of the top voting responses about what we should do with the donut was light fires across Devon, I think shows what a big impact it had on the participants, but also potentially on moving things forward in this direction across our bioregion. But in the background, I think I always felt that we would actually have to use some data and actually measure some of these metrics. And as Isabel mentioned, we made a conscious decision to take an outcomes focused or a metrics focused approach, which is that we deliberately designed our metrics that to be the metrics that would give us the most insight, the most information, that would drive the process forward the most, rather than reverting to what many people do, is taking a data-driven approach with the question, what information can we gather from the data that we've already got? I think that was the right decision. The trade-off of that decision is that you end up with a lot of metrics which are theoretically good, which are conceptually good, but which are almost impossible to measure. So this is where I come in, which is we're going to try and work through how we can actually bring the Devon Doughnut to life, in the sense not of keeping it alive, but to bring the insights that it provides, bring the impetus that it provides, and the focus that it gives us, and turning it building on a foundation of real data. So this is a slide that Isabel has already shown, which is entitled "Steps in Our Process of Becoming Clear." I think it's also, when I see this, I see my work being on the right-hand side of this, and actually this is where it's the least clear. Is actually what, now we've created this donut and we've been through this process with all these participants from across our bioregion, and they're engaged and they're motivated. What are we actually going to do with it next? How do we actually maintain that momentum? How do we push forward into the next phase of the process? And obviously, from my perspective as a data specialist, how can I bring real data and real information into the process to make it far more impactful? I wrote down while Isabel was talking, the Devon Doughnut is great, but conceptual metrics aren't enough. And that is very much my own opinion. And it may indeed be the case that that's not true. And it may be that what we've got is already enough. But my focus is on how we can actually bring real data into it. And I was looking back through some of the original slides that Isabel and Jane presented during the Coffee and Donuts process. And I found two slides which I thought were really interesting. This one, which was actually before the actual donut existed. We just had this mock-up of what it might look like. And Jane called this slide, "A Devon Doughnut might look like this. Can we turn the red ring into the red stuff into green? In one picture, we can see where Devon is healthy, where it's not healthy, where it's in a good condition, where it's not, where is it thriving, where is it not thriving. We don't just want to see where we're failing, but where we need to head to." And I thought it was such a good stage in the process where we were imagining, what if we had a donut for Devon, if we localized the Cape Raworth donut into Devon, what would it enable us to do? We had so many exciting conversations about how we might be empowered, or how this evidence, this information might give people agency within the South Devon bioregion, or within Devon more widely.
Nick, I think we've lost your slides.
Oh, have you?
Yeah, I can't see it.
I can still see it. And if others can't see it, please raise your hand or shout out, but I'm able to see the slides.
I'm able to see them too.
Yeah, I can see them.
Okay, Isabel, it sounds like it might be isolated to you. Thank you, though.
You've probably seen them before.
Yeah, Isabel knows the slide inside out.
You just have to listen to my dulcet tones. So I think this slide captures a snapshot, a moment in time where we were really wondering what the potential of this approach might be. And as Isabel has described so eloquently, what became apparent is that it was the process of creating this donut that was actually incredibly powerful over the pandemic years when it was created. But what I really latched onto was the potential of it as a tool with data, real data sitting in it, that we could actually localize even further within Devon. And the second slide that we had at that time was about this idea about creating the donut being a frame, creating a framework that different people could operate within, or different people would grab different bits of. Some people we recognized very early that some people were very focused on ecological sealing, and they're very interested in working into those metrics. But others, of course, are not interested in that. They're interested in the social foundation metrics much more, and that's where their expertise are focused, and their interest is focused. But actually, what we realized is that the donut could, in theory, be repurposed and used by different people in different ways at different spatial scales. And we saw quite early that this is one of the potential powers of the donut, is that it could be a tool that anyone could pick up and use for their own particular purposes. Having said that, we didn't actually get very far through the process of working out how that would actually happen. We created a lot of interest, but it feels now is the time to really move forward and start seeing how the donut can actually be used. So here's a screen grab from the interactive donut, and I picked out access to nature because of course I would, because it's the thing I'm most interested in, or one of them. And when you look at the online donut, what you'll find is that we've got some amazing metrics, as Isabel has explained. And the process we went through to develop these metrics was just one of the best things I've ever been involved in. They are really meaningful metrics. They're metrics which have been selected because they mean something. They mean something to people, they mean something to citizens, they mean something to policymakers. We felt that they could really have an impact in moving the dial in the way that people perceived Devon or the South Devon bioregion. But you'll also be struck by the fact that they're incredibly hard to measure. Some of these are simply at the moment unmeasurable. We don't have data that can actually help us to assess these metrics, and that is a slight problem. It might not be a massive problem, because actually you might find that you might feel that the metrics are more important and the process is more important than the actual data and the measuring of the metrics. But for me, I think the donut can deliver way more impact and have a much broader benefit if these metrics are also quantified. And the other thing we spent a lot of time wrestling with during the coffee and donuts process as we were developing the donut was clearly how many interactions there are between the different principles, both from the inner ring of the donut to the outside and vice versa, but also between metrics, for example, in the social foundation. And obviously, for example, the one that leaps to mind, access to nature and the interaction with health and well-being, they're so inextricably entwined. How can you measure one without taking a systems approach and understanding how it impacts on the other metrics? So we've been wrestling with a lot of these things, and we continue to do so. And some of these problems, some of these questions we might need to work through in order to take the donut out into the bioregion. So from a data perspective, some of the questions that we'll need to think about. Obviously, I've already mentioned we need to be able to measure some of the metrics. So it's taking metrics from a theoretical space, from a conceptual idea to a meaningful practice, to use in practice. We need to be able to answer the question that the metrics are posing. I put data deficits and suffering surrogates just as a bit of a kooky expression, but this is just to remind me that one of the big challenges we face is that we have a huge deficit in the data that we need in order to understand the health of our bioregion. We want to baseline resilience in communities in our bioregion. We don't really have the data that we need. And we also rely very heavily in the UK on surrogate data. So things which correlate with or are used as surrogates for the actual things that we're interested in. And it's got out of control because people are using the most crazy surrogates you could possibly imagine, where there's almost no correlation or evidence of correlation anyway. There's huge variability in spatial scale, and the way that the donut and the data that underpins the metrics varies across the Devon or the bioregion, and that's something that we have to really work into. Thresholds, we'll have to go back to thresholds at some point. In the donut, we created those green and red bars as a way of representing the way that individuals or citizens or communities would sit across the threshold. So recognizing that some bits of the bioregion are healthier than others, or some metrics are performing better than others in different places. So it was quite a neat way of visualizing it, But again, what are the thresholds, and how are we going to agree what they are and how to measure them? I think it's absolutely imperative that we take a systems approach. We need to understand the way that benefits or negative impacts interact and the way that benefits flow around the bioregion and within the donut. So very quickly, just a couple of slides just to work into some of those challenges. So spatial scale and spatial variation. So this is a map of South Devon bioregion, just showing a national data set called Index of Multiple Deprivation that we have in the UK. It uses 7 different dimensions to assess socioeconomic challenge or social deprivation. And in this map, red and orange signify socially, economically challenged communities, highly deprived communities, and actually some of those red ones are among the most socially challenged communities, not just in the UK, but actually in Europe. And those actually sit cheek by jowl with communities which are some of the most affluent in our country, and certainly in our bioregion. So my question is, how does the donut deal with that? And I've got the note there, risks of averaging and generalization. If you average Devon, then Devon doesn't do too badly on a lot of these metrics. But the devil is in the detail. And once you actually go in close, you'll discover that there's huge variability within the metrics. And actually, there are other barriers which are far more important. And the reason I've put this little zoomed in, this is a community called Dartmouth, which sits down on the estuary of the River Dart. It's one of the most affluent communities in Devon. It is directly on one of the most world-class natural resource with huge high-quality access to nature and the environment. But sitting up on the top of the hill at the top of Dartmouth is an extremely socioeconomically challenged community. And the Dart Harbour Master recently said, actually last week, told us that less than half of people in Dartmouth can swim. And in that little community up on top of the hill, it's much, much lower than that. So what you're seeing in Dartmouth is that there is a small group of people who don't have access to the resources that landscape could provide them with. So there are significant barriers to them accessing and gaining the benefits of a healthy natural environment. So at what scale do we need to make these assessments? How deep do we need to go in order to understand the complexities of how different parts of society are benefiting or not benefiting from the natural environment around them, for example? I don't know the answers to these questions, by the way. I'm just throwing them out there. And then just the last one is about setting thresholds. So this is a map that shows the Environment Agency, our government agency responsible for rivers and water quality and the environment. And they assess the health of rivers. And this map shows the overall results of that assessment. Basically, anything yellow, orange, or red is a fail and is regarded as not being ecologically healthy. Okay, so that's interesting. It's not in a good state. But when I show you this picture, which illustrates part of the River Dart in this case, which is actually classified as not being ecologically healthy. Sometimes we have to recognize that the thresholds that are in place aren't actually serving a useful purpose, perhaps. Because the threshold is actually possibly one of the key things that helps us to drive change, to motivate people, to get people's attention. And if you ask people, why is the River Dart, ecologically unhealthy, they might say, well, no, there's nothing wrong with it. I go up there all the time and it's wonderful. Like the picture shows, aesthetically, there's nothing wrong with it, and people will get huge benefits from interacting with it as a natural resource. The fact that it's ecologically regarded as unhealthy, does that help us? Is it a useful thing in our metrics for the donut? So it's really about understanding the system and how this entity, the river, how does its health relate to the other metrics in the donut? And what can we do in order to unlock the flow of those benefits between where they're coming from and the people who probably need them the most? So yeah, so that's all I was going to say. I was just going to run through some of those data, some practical considerations around data, but none of that is to the detriment of what Isabel said, which is that it's the the process of creating the donut is incredibly important, and that I've no doubt whatsoever that the process of using the learning from the Devon Doughnut process, and all of the information that we generated and all of the social capital that we created with our stakeholders is so important, and it will be important going forward. But if we want to really unlock the power of the donut, my feeling is that we need to get better at measuring some of these metrics. And the final question is, does it matter if we can't do it? Does it matter if we can't actually measure all the metrics? Is it about the journey, or is it about the destination? What we might find is that actually it doesn't matter, because it's the process through which we've created the metrics which is the most impactful and important thing. And it's better to try and measure than necessarily being completely wedded to the idea of being able to measure them in some way, shape, or form. So that's all I was going to say.
Thank you, Nick. Really wonderful presentation. Being a metrics and data fan myself, you definitely were speaking to my interest. I'm also a big picture thinker, so I appreciated Isabel. So this particular combination worked really well for me and for this series, which I think does that sort of big picture and then hone in on the data and measurement side of things. We've got some really great questions coming in the sidebar, and so some of them will ask, as Ralph noted up front, we'll ask you to go off mute. Some of them are a little bit more complex, and we might do a little bit of combining and summarizing. But I wanted to start with Ondine, the question that you had, in part because when Kate Rayworth presented on the donut at our 2019 conference in Rotterdam, what you ask is essentially the question that I asked right after she presented. So it's a question that's kind of near and dear to my heart. So Ondine, if you wouldn't mind going off mute and just voicing your question for Isabel and Nick, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. And thank you both for the very insightful presentations, learning so much. I'm just curious about the role of business in this story. You've done deep work with citizens and policymakers, which are very deeply represented. But yeah, very, very much wondering what the thinking around business actors are. How is the meso layer of the system represented, most especially because, yeah, how is business involved in these open inquiry processes? And we know that business needs to be a really big part of any solutions that emerge. So curious.
So we didn't engage many businesses in the Devon Doughnut process, although farming is a big business here in Devon, and we did have some farmers engaging with us. So I think business, or our experience is that business is very hard to bring into this space. However, the work going forward that we're doing on climate adaptation, we are planning to work business sector by business sector, bringing in a 3 horizons process in order to really kind of look at where we are now, where we need to go, what the possibilities are, and in the context of climate adaptation, what the risk is of not doing anything. So we are starting to engage with that, but we have never really had the capacity until now to be able to do that, because we recognize that business inhabits a rather different universe. It needs a different language. And when we talk about citizens, we reckon everybody's a citizen. You know, you can be in business, you can be a doctor, you can be a farmer, you can be whatever, a dustman, you're still a citizen. So kind of citizens for us engaged with people as individuals. Now we want to engage with businesses as sectors, and using the regenerative design process, which is kind of working guild by guild, knowing that each guild will have a different set of concerns and a different set of questions and actions. That probably isn't a very satisfactory response, but we're not really a business-oriented organization.
I think it's a good response. I think when you talk about livelihoods, as part of the process. I think that's where we come at it in that sense of defining a broader church in terms of business. I think the one sector which is of paramount importance is the tourism, recreation, and leisure industry. South Devon, the West Country, the Southwest region, has about 10 million visitors a year, and the tourism industry is absolutely critical foundation of the local economy. What's interesting is that you could look at the donut entirely through the lens of visitors to the region, because they actually have a very different ecological ceiling in the sense that the metrics would all be scored quite differently, because people who are visiting our region behave very differently to people who live here. So actually, they're a really important audience, and I suppose the tourism businesses who are reliant on those visitors do have a key role to play in the and being part of the conversation about our bioregion. For example, water use. Tourists use a vast amount of water compared to local residents, and they often display far greater levels of poor water behavior, shall we say, when they're on holiday. So there's no point persuading residents to use less water, for example, in a drought, if the 10 million visitors are using an inordinate amount of water. So it is a key part of the process, but in a systems way, by businesses and residents and citizens as key components of the system.
Thank you, Isabel and Nick, and thank you, Undine, for that question. The next question, I'm gonna actually do some summarizing. This one came in from Jonas Beck. And in some ways, this is, it goes back to the very starting point of the R3.0 dialogue series altogether, which goes back to the beginning of 2024, when I posted on LinkedIn just a post about a study, a scientific paper that had just come out from the Global Commons Alliance, and in particular their Earth Commission. And I believe it was that paper that talked about looking at these sustainability thresholds, or planetary boundaries, or the Earth Commission calls them Earth system boundaries, at the bioregional scale. And so they also talk about the need to sort of triangulate with the global citizen perspective, is what they call it. So the question from Jonas is about this sort of focusing on the local level, which has gotten a lot of attention, but how that interacts with the global dimensions, particularly because the Doughnut framework, talks about the global and the local. There are four lenses, I think they call it, approach is local, environmental, local, social, and then global. So really, Jonas had a series of questions, like, are we doing enough to center global justice, particularly when it comes to hard to measure aspects like equity, representation, and the voices of those most affected by consumption? And what role could the Bioregional Learning Center play in deepening this connection between local action and global responsibility? So Isabel, maybe over to you first to take a crack at that one, and then Nick, if you have input as well.
Yeah, no, it's a very good question. I should offer a cheerful disclaimer that we're not completely wedded to the donut. We're not convinced that the donut actually is the way forward, or certainly in our bioregion. We learned a lot through doing it. And we're incredibly grateful that we did that whole process. It taught us so much, but we're not necessarily following in the trackways that it's laid down. What could we do both locally and globally? So we're a small organization. There are 7 people in our organization. Our focus has always been on the local primarily. However, we do work at global scale in the sense that we interact in this growing bioregional field of people around the world who are working at bioregional scale. And what's really interesting to see is that, and R3.0 is absolutely a case in point, is that experienced organizations are now embracing bioregioning, and they're stepping forward to offer their own expertise and their own capabilities in taking this to a new scale. So the scale at which Bioregional Learning Centre operates is we are part of a learning alliance, the Bioregional Learning Alliance. We are, if you could say, we're a kind of group of action researchers that are keen also to share our practice with the world. So we've got a course that's starting, in fact, next Tuesday. But we have no ambitions to engage with global politics because we see there are other organizations already doing that. But I think what we're going to see, already seeing and will see over the coming years, is that the bioregional narrative is really catching fire now. It's kind of beginning to infiltrate all sorts of conversations. And I don't think that we need to push it. The fact that we're doing it here on the ground and we're acting as an example as to how to do it, we think is enough for us. Bill, you're muted.
Sorry, Nick, do you have any thoughts you want to share, or should we move on to the next question?
No, it's a really good question. And how do we place our bioregion within the wider context of Europe and globally, and then obviously relating it to carrying capacity? The donut is about trying to understand the carrying capacity of our bioregion. What can it sustain in terms of residents and tourists, as we've just discussed? And but yeah, it sits within a global supply chain. And we don't know how resilient South Devon is now in the current system. We're trying to work into how resilient it is within the global system, but how resilient might it be if it wasn't part of the global system? And all these questions. I think that's the next 10 years of work in South Devon bioregion.
Yeah, and that really does key into why we at R3.0 launched this series that has concurrent with it, sort of alongside this learning series. We have an intention to do actual research around that. And again, in our sort of concept note identifying that, we cite these two papers from the Earth Commission where it really points to, so Devon in particular would be a good example of, yes, what is the sort of if you just look at the bioregion itself, but of course, bioregions at this point in human history are not isolated entities. We exist in these globalized supply chains, and you might even call them globalized impact chains. So I think that you're not alone in being very early in this process. And the work that you're doing, I think, is very encouraging to see, particularly coming back to the donut and looking to do further research on the data. The last thing I'll say is, Isabel, we agree with you wholeheartedly that the donut is perhaps one of the best visual tools out there. We also agree with you, and in fact, Randy Saad was just able to join the call, and Randy is collaborating with us on some research that's actually engaging with some of the municipalities that have applied the donut to try to identify what some of the shortcomings are in terms of the guidance that the Donut Economics Action Lab provides, and helping to fill that gap. So this is very resonant with our experience as well. I want to shift it over to Claire, who, as usual, is asking an excellent question. Claire, I wonder if you might not mind going off mute and voicing it yourself, because I think it might come clearly and concisely from you directly.
Yeah, it's got to do with the, I guess, the more living in right relationship with the land and attuning to the land, and allowing that to guide how we're looking at what we're paying attention to. And so really recognizing the power of the donut framework for doing that work. But I suppose what was also driving my question that is in the comments is we tend to put a lot of emphasis on like what we do from a logic perspective, And that sometimes actually devalues what it means to have a sense of belonging. And, you know, if we feel disconnected, we're just not, it really affects all of our behavior. It's a hugely powerful driver. And I know we've had wonderful conversations about this. I just wanted your reflections on how we balance both the really sort of logic-driven side with the part that often gets really neglected, which is the tuning and the, you know, how do we drive more powerful ways of feeling like we're not disconnected?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, we completely agree with you that belonging, the sense of identity, and really inhabiting your bioregion by sensing into the bioregion is absolutely where we are now. So we've evolved a lot since 2020, and the recent project that we just completed on the Dart salt marshes is a case in point. In fact, we had a meeting this morning to reflect on that process and to kind of think about what did we actually achieve through the way in which we brought artists into that process who were able to embody the salt marsh, which is an ecosystem which ordinary people can't really access because you have to get in a boat and it's very muddy and you're not supposed to tread on the salt marsh anyway. So it's kind of like, how do we embody this? And we were reflecting on the nature of our environment and what it's like to live in South Devon and what that does to our feelings of being in our body and our brains. So anyway, yes, that's incredibly important. In the donut process itself, we made belonging and connection and relationship a very strong entity or element of those Zoom sessions that happened every fortnight. And people would turn up to the Zoom sessions saying, I just need a shot of positivity here. I really want to hear what you're all doing and what you're all saying. And so we very deliberately created a heart-centered space in order to be able to hold this process. And I think that's incredibly important. And the way in which we contextualized the indicators and made them very relevant to South Devon. And we talked about the actual examples, like what's happening with our fishing industry off our coast, or why are farmers struggling at the moment? And if we look at the livelihoods domain, what livelihoods are we talking about? And thinking about political voice, we brought the Devon Youth Parliament on board to host that one. So they were kind of talking about their experiences of not being heard. So I think it's so important to make that personal and real and be able to tell those stories. But I must say that Bioregional Learning Centre, with its enthusiasm for arts and ecology, really kind of burning brightly at the moment. We're going to probably be heading as far into that space of kind of embodying the bioregion and sensing and feeling as we are into what Nick has been talking about. And so we're very excited. Nick's coming on board full time in a month's time. And so we'll have these two wings. We'll be flying with our two wings, our data wing and our arts wing.
And just to illustrate that, the one of the things I'm most interested in, my whole career, God knows, I can't remember how long it is, but I've been focused on data and particularly mapping. But what I'm really getting excited about now is how we can use maps in a much more creative way. So cartographic maps as art, maps as design, as another really powerful tool to connect with people. So actually bringing the data on, if they don't even notice that they're seeing the data and evidence, that they're actually engaging with something which is incredibly visual, which someone has taken a real amount of time to design and create in a really beautiful way. And so, that's something that I'm particularly interested in, is not just knocking out maps that show data, because no one's interested in that, but actually using the maps themselves to actually, as part of the engagement, to get people excited about understanding their bioregion. That must be possible, surely.
There's some great bioregional mapping happening, as Andrew pointed out, particularly in the design school. So those who are members of the design school, there's a series that's coming up on bioregional mapping by one of the real masters of this, Brandon Latzinger from the Cascadia bioregion. And then there are other really beautiful bioregional maps, in particular the I forget the name of the person or organization that's doing it, but the colored versions of the watersheds, those are really beautiful. So Nick, I think you may be onto something there. We've got about 10 minutes left, and we had a question from Hank Hatters, but he's dropped off. So I'll see if we have time for this after, but I want to take it to Carrie Norton next, who posed a couple of different or several different issues in the sidebar. And Carrie, if you might, I'm not sure we'll have time to do all of those, but if you might maybe choose one of the issues that you had brought up and bring it out here for Isabel and Nick to consider.
Thank you, Bill, and Isabel and Nick. I have a million questions, but maybe the one that feels most alive for me consistently in some of the conversations in our different communities of learning is this question of how do we accelerate our learning efficiency? So for example, as I'm listening to you here, Isabel, and Nick too, it's like, okay, you've got 8 years under your belts of enormous learning and process, and I heard at least 3 different, maybe 4 different practices that we could conduct in our bioregion as we're just getting started. And so what I find myself yearning for is like codification of these processes. So like coffee and donuts, steps 1 through 20, what do you do? And I realize that that's a burden that you shouldn't have to bear necessarily on behalf of our learning communities, but yeah, I'm just wondering about how do we create this upward spiral of learning from those who've come before us, who've already learned a lot of lessons that could maybe be lessons that we don't have to learn quite as deeply, take as long to learn them since we don't have that much time. I hope I'm being clear.
Okay, I'm going to put something in the chat here from our very beautiful new website, which is the steps that we took to animate our bioregion. And we'll also be covering that in the new course that's launching, Bioregioning in Practice, next Tuesday online with Gaia Education. So 10 of us, bioregional practitioners around the world, have formed the Bioregional Learning Alliance, and together we're offering this webinar series that really takes you through our experience of the practice of bioregioning. But we're absolutely clear that there is no orthodoxy. There is no one way to do this. It would be very nice and easy to say, you just do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And we can say in Devon, we did do those steps, but it doesn't mean that everywhere that's going to be suitable for everywhere. Everywhere does it a bit differently. And I think the main thing is that there's so many doorways into bioregioning in your place. You take the doorway that is most accessible, it's most open, it offers the most energy and the most possibility, and you kind of find yourself in this space, which could go anywhere because you're dealing with whole systems. And that's when it gets quite confusing. And you need to really just kind of find your groove and work along that particular groove. And one of the grooves that we found very early on was water, partly thanks to Nick, who's a water expert. And we've stuck with water ever since. And actually, water is a fantastic groove to be in because it goes absolutely everywhere. Nothing much can happen without water. And so you don't need to feel you have to cover everything. As long as you become really kind of embedded in one thing, you can influence a lot of other things to happen. So Nick, I'm sure you've got some reflections on that.
Well, yeah, it's an excellent point. I mean, I've been a director of Bioregional Learning Centre since it started. When I met Isabel for the first time, we realized that we spoke about exactly the same things in two completely different languages. So I'm from an environmental and water management background, and I talk about ecosystem services and ecosystem restoration and systems approach. And Isabel talked about exactly all the things that I spoke about, but she used a complete different language, the language of bioregions. And I'm still on that learning curve now of trying to catch up. And the more resources there are, the more learning and insights that can be shared from the front runners, the people, the leaders out there who are forging ahead in their bioregions. The more that we can package that up and share it in as many ways as we can, the better, mainly from a purely selfish perspective, because I want to find those resources. And the reason I was distracted just then is because I was copying all the links out of the chat to make sure I don't miss the mapping ones, because as soon as I hear some of these examples, I'm straight into them just because I want to learn it. Anyone who goes through a process in their bioregion and learns through failure, when other bioregions have already been through that process and learned through failure, and they do it without realizing, is a complete waste of time. So every sharing the learning as widely as possible is absolutely critical, because it stops people following in your footsteps when in terms of failure.
Yeah, Nick, I agree. And Carrie, you were saying, does it need to take 8 years? Does it need to take this long everywhere? I don't think it does. It's just like the pioneers had to figure it out as we went along. So it was rather slow progress, but I'm absolutely confident that people coming up behind us will do it faster.
Yeah.
Just one other thing I was going to say is that Isabel didn't mention. She didn't actually mention. I know it's slightly gauche to talk about money, but the total cost of the Devon Doughnut project was basically zero, because Isabel and Jane did the whole thing for themselves for nothing. So the return on that investment is significant because I'm
guessing that's in the positive numbers.
Imagine what you could do with funding.
Yes, indeed, of course. Yeah, that's a really important thing. I just want to say one last thing, because it came to me as you were both speaking. I have a dream for the global equivalent of a bioregional knowledge commons that is a meta layer that would connect the global bioregional learning centers digitally. So I just wanted to articulate that dream, how we can all manifest that.
Carrie, you couldn't have teed things up better for the next point that I was going to make, which is that we at the R3.0 are actually stewarding a bioregional knowledge commons exploration with our new fellow, Andrea Ferris, who's actually produced a report in which she talked with Isabel and many others in the field about this idea. And so one of the ways that we're conceiving of it is as a global patterns, so that there would be patterns of bioregioning that would be sort of at a global meta level, as you're saying, and then commons for individual bioregions that would be very context specific. So really kind of keying into Claire's point, and this is something that we've identified with the donut, is that the donut kind of prescribes what things are. And we think that instead of prescribing, it should be guidance that then gets customized at a local context. And maybe some of the indicators or approaches aren't relevant, but at least having access to that learning, as Nick, as you said, I think is important. So I think that we're nearing the end. We're going to pull up the slides and go to some of the next sessions. But Isabel, I see your hand is near your mic, so I want to just check in and see if you've got input on that question before we end this out.
I think that it comes back to kind of what can we do at a global scale. I think that there's more and more connecting happening, and I think it's incredibly exciting that it's all becoming much more professionalized, if you like, or synthesized, that it's becoming more accessible. My hand's near the mic because I know if I let my mic fall, it can often make a kind of a strange rasping sound, which annoys everybody. I didn't have much more to say, but thank you.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Isabel. Before I say our final thanks to Isabel and Nick, I'm just going to carry us through a few of our upcoming things here at R 3.0. So in parallel with the Bioregional Carrying Capacities series, we have an open dialogue series, and our next one is coming up later this week. So this is one I'm particularly excited about. It's bioregioning in Australia with Michelle Maloney from the Australian Earth Laws Alliance, and Mary Graham, who is an Indigenous scholar in Australia, and then Kieran Kashyap, who's engaging with Regen Sydney. And also Kieran just recently published his doctoral dissertation, which is a really, really great, I know it may seem weird to be pushing doctoral dissertations, but this one is well worth the read. So that's happening. We list it in UTC, but if you go on our website, we've got a handy dandy converter there. It's 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. For me on the East Coast. So that's our next open dialogue, and this is our landing page on the open dialogues. The bioregional carrying capacity sessions, we have a landing page there. That's where we'll be posting the recording and the deck, and if there may be some other materials there on that place. We haven't nailed it down yet, but we're in conversation with researchers at both the University of Washington in Cascadia, who are looking at, they're doing a research project right now on the planetary boundaries for Cascadia. And then researchers that we collaborate with at the University of Guelph in Canada, Daniela Sinkel and Emma Mintz, who are doing a literature review on bioregional carrying capacities. So do sort of a research focus on our next bioregional carrying capacities session, but we don't have that scheduled yet. Finally, we've got our conference coming up in September. This year, it's online again, and it's exclusively devoted to bioregioning. So it's braiding bioregional resilience and regeneration, learning to re-inhabit Earth together. So that'll be happening on the 9th and 10th of September. You can check out our website for that. Two other quick things about that. So we're having bioregional confluences. So since the conference itself is online, we're inviting bioregions to flow alongside. The word confluence means flow alongside. So to meet, gather in person to view the conference, and then the day after on the 11th of September, and then again on the 18th of September, for those who are, the time zone doesn't coordinate, so they have to watch the conference on recordings. We're going to have on the 11th and 18th, a global confluence debrief day. So this is an opportunity for the bioregions globally to confer with one another, share what they learned from the conference and from their confluences, and also share what they're doing in their own bioregional contexts. That will be followed by a couple of months through the end of the year of having these debriefs on a continental scale. So all of the confluences that participated have opportunity to engage with the other bioregions on their continent. What you see here is the expression of interest. So if you have interest in this, we'll share that link in our materials. Right now, it's not broadly public because we're getting enough interest. I think we've got 25 different confluences, expressions of interest right now, and we're going through a process of meeting with them. I think that's the last thing. Oh, yes, we created a guidance document, and that's informing our calls. So this bioregional confluencing guidance document is available on our website. So I think that brings us through to an end. Thank you again, Isabel and Nick. This was a really interesting session for me particularly to get this update. I've known about the Devon Doughnut, but seeing really where you're taking it into the future. And thanks to everyone for attending and asking such great questions. Thanks again.
Thank you. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks
Thank
for
you.
having us.
Take care.